Sometimes life doesn't break us with thunder. It comes softly, like a headache you keep ignoring, a cup of coffee you don't finish, a feeling that something is missing and you're the only one pretending it is. That was Ethan Cole's morning. A billionaire with everything, except the thing that lets a man sleep at night. Ethan woke before dawn to the light of the city sneaking under his blackout curtains. He lay still, counting the throb behind his right eye. 1 beat, 2, the same dull drum that had followed him for weeks. He'd blamed the board meetings, the midnight calls with investors, the prototype launches that demanded the kind of attention only sleeplessness can purchase. But today it felt heavier, like a message he couldn't swipe away. He sat up in the penthouse that everyone said was perfect, walls the color of quiet oceans, floors so clean you could see yourself choosing to leave. A Steinway Grand sat near the glass, the keys covered, untouched, as if melody itself had been put under lock and key. He padded to the kitchen. The automated lights rose like obedient servants. He poured water, swallowed 2 pills, and waited for relief that never learned his address. In the window, the city was awake, traffic ribboning the avenues, tiny people carrying their tiny hopes. Ethan's reflection hovered over it all, a man whose jawline made magazines and whose eyes made assistants step out of the way. Hazel, steady and tired. He massaged the bridge of his nose. Ethan quietly said, "Enough." He wasn't the kind of man who visited hospitals. Hospitals were where promises went to die, where monitors kept rhythm with worry. But the old family physician had texted twice, then called, then booked the appointment himself at St. Augustine Private. "You're not 25 anymore, Ethan," the man had said, "and you don't get to bully your body like a subordinate." So Ethan would go. He'd give some blood, tell a few lies about how much water he drank, nod at advice he wouldn't take. He had an 11 a.m. with the Singapore team, a noon signing, a 3 o'clock with legal, and a dinner he'd cancel. The schedule made a tidy wall. He pressed his palm against it and felt nothing. He showered, steam rose. He thought of the piano while the water beat his shoulders. He wondered absurdly if the headache would soften if he played the first song he'd ever learned. 8 bars of something not quite choppin', not quite himself. He closed his eyes and saw a girl laughing in a kitchen with a cracked tile and a kettle that never stopped singing. Amara's. Her name arrived like a scent, uninvited and undeniable. The kettle, the cracked tile, the way she leaned against counters like the whole world was a chair. Her hair coiled at the nape of her neck. Her hands always warm, even in winter. The last night pressed like a fingerprint on glass, the argument that wasn't loud, the silence that was. His mother's voice on the phone, polite daggers, his father's quiet. Legacy, son. The driver waiting downstairs, the rain that made everything look like it was underwater. Ethan's mouth had formed an apology that never became sound. Amara had blinked once, as if filing the scene into a drawer labeled "Lesson Learned," and set the kettle back on the stove. He'd left believing time was a cure. He debuilt an empire shaped like armor, wearing quarterly earnings like medals. And still, some mornings he woke up tasting the tea she used to brew, a little too sweet, always poured to the brim, always handed to him with a look that said, "You're safe here, whether you admit it or not." He dressed in a navy suit that would ease cameras and frighten auditors. The watch, gifted after the IPO, slid into place like a verdict. In the elevator, his assistant, Leela, joined on 28, tablet in hand, breath already racing. "Good morning, Mr. Cole. Your driver's downstairs. Dr. Patel confirmed your 9 a.m. check-in is through the east entrance, less press. I moved the call with Singapore to 1. I told legal we're sending revisions by 4. Also, send the engineering bonuses now," he said, voice even. "All tiers, and tell facilities the 6th floor lights are too harsh." "Noted," Leela said. She pushed her glasses up. "You look a little pale." He offered nothing. The elevator whispered open to the lobby's incense and stone. Security rose to attention. A concierge with a memory like a ledger nodded them through. The car door opened. Leather. Quiet. The familiar cocoon of people who solved his smallest inconvenience before he recognized it. The city slid by. Billboards. A woman teaching her son to look both ways. A baker turning the sign from closed to open with ceremonial care. The headache sat in his skull like a folded note he refused to read. Mr. Hope voiceover. When a man builds a life without softness, he starts mistaking hardness for safety. He forgets that the safest place a heart can rest is on another heart that refuses to drop it. St. Augustine Private rose from the avenue like a cathedral to precision, glass, slate, light pouring down atriums as if cleanliness were a holy thing. The east entrance was quiet, shielded by hedges clipped into obedient shapes. Inside, marble softened by rugs, the antiseptic scent that always announces that bodies are being repaired nearby, the choir of quiet voices. A volunteer pushed a cart of storybooks toward the pediatric wing. Somewhere down the hall, a child laughed in quick bursts, 3 notes of joy, a small trumpet's call that made nurses exchange glances and smile. Ethan's eyes flicked toward the sound, then away. He signed, accepted a keycard, declined bottled water, sat in a lounge where the magazines were curated to flatter money. He should have checked the Singapore deck. He should have replied to the patent email with the line about provisional scope. He should have sent that message to the foundation about the mobile clinics. Yes, fund the 7th truck, no, do not brand it like a billboard. He reached for his phone, then stopped. The laughter rang out again. He looked up. Across the atrium, beyond a pillar carved with the donors' names, a woman shifted a small boy from one hip to the other and murmured to a nurse. She wore a simple dress, nothing that could announce her in a room like this except for the gravity she carried. From here, he could not see her face, only the line of her jaw, the way her shoulders squared when the nurse asked a question, the care with which she smoothed the boy's hair. The boy leaned back, pouty, small shoes kicking the hem of her dress, and laughed. Again that trumpet call. It tugged at something he'd boarded up. He frowned as if he could outthink a feeling. "Mr. Cole," a receptionist called gently, "the lab can take you now." He didn't move. The woman turned slightly, not enough to reveal, just enough to aim her voice at the child. "Hey," she said, soft but steady. "Brave faces, remember." The 2 words, brave faces, hit his chest like a fingertip tapping a locked door. He knew that phrase, not generally, exactly. He'd heard it on a December evening while the kettle hissed and the rain tapped the window. Brave faces, Eth, we do it for each other. The receptionist tried again. "Mr. Cole." He stood, smoothed nothing from his jacket. The lounge hummed. A newscaster murmured something about markets holding steady. A doctor with a clipped walk checked his watch. The woman shifted the boy again. He caught a glimpse of her cheek, the clean line from ear to jaw, the small silver hoop she always wore because studs looked like apologies. Impossible, he told himself. He took a step toward the lab and another toward the pillar, the 2 directions fighting like siblings. The headache pulsed a warning. The boy's laugh dissolved into a cough, quick and sharp, then a small breath and a brave face that didn't quite hold. The woman kissed his hair. The boy relaxed against her. There are seconds that last a lifetime. The heart takes a photograph. Years later, you can still smell the hallway, still hear the elevator, still count the beads on the volunteer's bracelet as she passes. And you can still feel the sentence God places in your mouth. Ethan turned his head. The lab door waited, obedient, ordinary. He turned back. The woman shifted and the world stopped pretending. "Amaras." The name arrived without permission and sat down inside him. He did not exhale, he did not blink. He simply stood there, man, suit, armor, and felt the floor tilt. The boy wriggled to look around. Hazel eyes, his eyes caught the light. A dimple flashed and vanished. A small hand waved at no one in particular. The volunteer with the books paused, her smile widening instinctively at the charm of a child who smiled like a promise. Ethan swallowed. His mouth tasted like old copper and unsaid things. "Mr. Cole," Leela whispered at his shoulder, somehow already there, seeing schedules, not ghosts. "They're ready." Ethan quietly said, "In a minute." And so the day refused to be ordinary. A man walked into a hospital to treat a headache and found the ache that had named his life. He didn't know yet that he was looking at the first photograph of the family he'd been too proud and too frightened to fight for. He only knew that the past had stopped whispering and had started speaking his name. There are days when the world is a maze with one true exit. But sometimes, you meet a hallway that refuses to let you pass until you say the thing you've been afraid to say for years. Ethan moved, not toward the lab, not toward logic, but toward the sound of a boy trying very hard to be brave. The atrium's light fell in sheets. A monitor chirped once and fell silent, like a bird remembering it was indoors. Amara was still angled away, steadying the child on her hip, her fingers tracing small circles on his back, circles that calmed storms. He stopped a few steps behind her. For a heartbeat, he considered retreat, letting the door close on the past with all the gentle cruelty of an elevator. But the boy turned, and the hazel in those eyes felt like a mirror he could not refuse. Ethan quietly said, "Amara." She went very still. The nurse paused, a clipboard hovering midair. The boy looked between them, curious. Amara turned, and the years did what years do. They stacked themselves into lines at the corners of her eyes, softened her mouth, deepened the set of her shoulders. But the center of her, whatever you call the thing that doesn't change, was the same. Her gaze touched his face like a scan. Shock flashed, then something cool slid over it, like a lid upon boiling water. Amara softly said, "Ethan." The boy blinked up at him, then scrunched one eye the way children do when they're deciding whether you are safe. Boy softly said, "Hi." The sound landed and detonated something quiet inside Ethan. He offered his hand, uselessly formal. Ethan quietly said, "Hey." Amara shifted her weight, placing the child gently on his feet. He clutched the fabric at her side, half hidden behind her leg. A small hospital bracelet circled his wrist, the inked name smudged from handling. Ethan quietly said, Are you okay?" Amara held his eyes. There was no anger in the look, not yet, only the care one takes with a blade. Amara softly said, "We're fine." The nurse recovered her clipboard professionalism. Nurse gently said, "Ms. Bennett, Dr. Alvarez can see you in a few minutes. If you need a quieter space, the family room is open." Amara softly said, "Thank you." The nurse left with the deliberate small steps of someone willing to be nearby if needed. Silence filled the space between past and present. The boy tugged at the hem of Amara's dress. Boy quietly said, "Mom, thirsty." Amara softly said, "We'll get water, 2 sips deal." He nodded with serious gravity. Ethan watched the exchange like a man listening at the door of a house he used to live in. Ethan quietly said, "Amara, can we talk?" She adjusted the strap of her bag. Amara softly said, "About what?" He swallowed. It felt like lifting something heavy without using his hands. Ethan quietly said, "About the last time, about letters I never saw, about this." He nodded toward the boy, then caught himself, ashamed of the gesture's bluntness. Amara's mouth tightened. Not cruelty, not pettiness, just the muscle memory of protecting a child with very little more than spine and prayer. Amara softly said, "Not here." The boy peered around her leg again, studying Ethan's face the way children study puzzles they already know the solution to. Ethan quietly said, "What's his name?" She did not answer at first. The pause was a gate. Amara softly said, "Liam." The name entered the room and made it fuller. Ethan quietly said, "Hi, Liam, I'm..." Liam softly said, "You talk like the man on Mom's radio." A laugh escaped Ethan before he could stop it. It startled him. When had he last laughed without scheduling it? Ethan quietly said, "I hope he says useful things." Liam quietly said, "Sometimes he says market correction." Mom turns it off. Amara's eyes flicked down, and a reluctant smile edged her mouth. It was gone before it could become a memory. Amara softly said, "We're late." She reached for the small water fountain nearby, cupped her palm while Liam drank. Ethan stood a step away, fighting the urge to offer and the humility to know he'd lost the right to offer anything. Mr. Hope voiceover. Pride is the most expensive silence. It charges you years for seconds you refuse to spend on an apology. He tried again, lowering his voice like a man approaching a wild creature he hopes will not bolt. Ethan quietly said, I didn't know about your letters about him. A muscle moved along Amara's jaw. Amara softly said, knowing requires looking. The sentence sliced and healed at the same time. He nodded, owning what he could. Ethan quietly said, you're right. Liam wiped his mouth with the back of his wrist, then examined his bracelet as if it were a ticket to someplace important. Liam quietly said, do you have a bracelet? Ethan quietly said, not today, they forgot to give me one. Liam softly said, you should ask. This, absurdly, felt like instruction from a small priest. Leela's text arrived, 4 gentle vibrations, the digital equivalent of clearing a throat. Ethan didn't look. The world had narrowed to the circumference of a child's laugh and the distance between 2 people whose names had once been said in the dark without the world watching. A door opened down the hall. A doctor in teal scrubs glanced at a chart. Nurse gently said, Ms. Bennett, we're ready. Amara turned, then hesitated. The boy reached up. She leaned down, kissed his forehead, and whispered something Ethan couldn't hear. Liam's shoulders unhitched. Ethan quietly said, May I wait? The question surprised him. He'd spent years with verbs that moved money and people. May I wait felt like a small, worthy thing. Amara studied him, as if deciding whether the past had learned enough humility to be allowed in the waiting room. Amara softly said, suit yourself. She took Liam's hand. They started toward the pediatric wing. Halfway there, the boy looked over his shoulder and waved, a compact, matter-of-fact gesture of inclusion. Ethan sat. He did not scroll. He did not email. He watched the volunteer pass again, the books wobbling and then writing themselves. He watched a father tie a shoelace with the seriousness of a surgeon. He listened to a monitor somewhere settle into a reliable rhythm. He held still. Mr. Hope voiceover. Sometimes love asks you to do the bravest thing you can do in a hospital. Sit without control. Minutes arranged themselves into a quiet stack. The headache receded, not gone, only less important. Leela approached, careful, as if walking across fresh paint. Leela softly said, the lab rescheduled you for 40 minutes from now. I'll keep them warm. He nodded. Leela followed his line of sight, door to the pediatric wing, and then looked back, understanding enough to make no sound about it. Leela softly said, I brought tea. He accepted the paper cup. Steam touched his face, familiar as a kitchen with a cracked tile. He almost smiled, then didn't. The door opened. Amara came out first, her eyes scanning automatically for exits and enemies. Liam followed, sticker on his shirt, bravery declared in cartoon ink. When he spotted Ethan, he brightened, the simple way children brighten at the sight of a thing that made them feel seen. Liam softly said, we got a star. Ethan quietly said, looks like you earned it. Liam softly said, Mom says stars are for the sky and for people who try. Ethan quietly said, she's right. Amara touched Liam's hair. The gesture was both a thank you and a reminder of gravity. Ethan quietly said, is everything okay? Amara met his gaze. She didn't offer details. He knew better than to ask a mother to unpack a file in a hallway. Amara softly said, we're managing. It wasn't a door, it wasn't a wall. It was a window with the curtain still drawn. He tried the only honest thing he had. Ethan quietly said, I'm sorry. The word hung there, ridiculous and correct. Amara softly said, for which part? He took a breath. A man used to speeches chose inventory instead. Ethan quietly said, for leaving, for believing other people's fear, for not looking, for the years. Her eyes softened by a fraction. like a lock accepting the right key but not yet turning. Amara softly said, "We should go." Liam tugged again at her dress. Liam softly said, "Can he come to my music thing?" Ms. Ruth said parents can sit in the back. The request shot clean through Ethan. He glanced at Amara. The air pulsed with the risk of saying yes. Amara softly said, "It's not." Ethan quietly said, "When is it?" Liam softly said, "Friday, after lunch, I'm learning morning song. I can do it with both hands, want to see." Ethan swallowed, feeling suddenly like a boy himself, called to the front of a class he had spent years funding but never entering. Ethan quietly said, "I would like that very much." Amara watched him with a look that measured not his money, not his press releases, but the weight of his next 7 days. Amara softly said, "If you come, you sit in the back. No gifts, no cameras, no look-at-me gestures. You don't make promises to him you can't keep." The rules fell into his open hands like something holy. Ethan quietly said, "Agreed." Liam softly said, "We can clap at the end, not loud because some kids get scared." Ethan quietly said, "I will clap the exact right amount." It made Amara look away to hide the smile that almost escaped. She recovered, straightened. Amara softly said, "We're going now." She turned, then paused again, as if some small justice required one more sentence. Amara softly said, "I did write twice. I even called once. Your mother answered. She said you were very busy." A quiet burned through his chest at the mention, clean and bright. Ethan quietly said, "I'm sorry for that too." She nodded, a receipt signed. Liam lifted his hand for a high five with solemn dignity. Ethan met it gently. The sound was soft, like a book closing. They walked away, mother and child, one step perfectly matched to the other. Ethan watched until the corner took them. The atrium regained its ordinary. The volunteer tucked a loose book back into place. The monitor chirped its approval of someone else's pulse. Leela waited a beat. Leela softly said, "Do you want me to move Singapore again?" Ethan quietly said, "No, I'll be there, and on Friday I'll be somewhere else first." He rose. The lab door stood where it always had. He headed toward it, the way a man heads into a room to have his blood taken and his life returned in pieces he hadn't realized he'd lost. A hallway gave him no exit but the truth. He took it, and for the first time in years he was not late for what mattered. Hospitals collect numbers the way oceans collect rain, quietly, endlessly. But there are some numbers a man cannot count with a machine. Years lost, words unsent, the exact distance between regret and repair. The lab chair hissed when Ethan sat. A phlebotomist with calm eyes and the forearms of someone who lifts lives for a living tide, a band around his arm. Phlebotomist softly said, "Make a fist." He obeyed. Veins rose like roads on a map he'd ignored. The needle slipped in with a pinch and crimson threaded into the tube, evidence that even kings are made of the same river as everyone else. Phlebotomist softly said, "You okay?" Ethan quietly said, "Yes." He was in a hallway 2 turns away, watching a boy with his eyes earn a sticker for bravery. Vials swapped with practiced clicks. Labels kissed glass, the band slid free. Phlebotomist softly said, "You can go back to the waiting area, results in a bit." He stood, the room gave him back to the atrium. Light, hush, the soft traffic of worry. Leela fell into step, the pace of a woman who knew how to be nearby without intruding. Leela softly said, "You have 20 minutes before Dr. Patel. Legal sent red lines, want me to?" Ethan quietly said, "Later." They returned to the lounge that had seen too many quiet wars. Ethan didn't sit. He stood where he could see both the pediatric door and the reflection of himself choosing to see it. The piano in his head startled him by playing on its own. Something simple, the first right-hand exercise Amara had teased him for, her laughter riding above the notes like a bird daring a storm. Memory is an instrument that plays when it wants, not when you schedule it. Flashback. A small apartment with a cracked tile. The kettle's stubborn song. Amara softly said, "You can practice here. I like mistakes that sound like trying." She sat cross-legged on the floor, counting beats with her fingers, her ankle brushing his calf in a way that turned rhythm into religion. Now, Leela's tablet hummed. She muted it. Her eyes asked a question her mouth wouldn't. Leela softly said, "Do you want me to check who's listed as the pediatrician for?" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Ethan's jaw worked. Ethan quietly said, "No. If I start with a file, I'll end with a file. I need to start with Friday." Leela nodded, taking that like a signature. She typed. Leela softly said, "I'll block your calendar. Personal, you'll get pushback." Ethan quietly said, "They'll live." A door whispered open. Dr. Patel, gray at the temples and unafraid of billionaires, offered a hand. Dr. Patel gently said, "You look like a man who's finally decided to be mortal." Ethan quietly said, "I'll try it for a week." They went into an exam room softly lit like good news. Cuff tightened, numbers climbed, descended, tongue depressed. Eyes followed a finger that pointed at nothing and everything. Dr. Patel gently said, "Stress, dehydration, migraine tendencies. Labs will help. But here's the medicine you won't like: sleep, actual food, fewer emergencies that are." Ethan quietly said, "I have shareholders." Dr. Patel gently said, "You also have a brain that will resign if you keep treating it like an intern." He handed over a page, diet, triggers, a prescription that would make noise smaller. Dr. Patel gently said, "Come back in a month. And Ethan, whatever you saw in that lobby, breathe before you run toward it or away from it." The advice landed with the weight of a man who had seen men choose wrong doors. Back in the atrium, Leela handed him a small paper bag. The prescription, a bottle of water, a mint he didn't ask for. Leela softly said, "Singapore in 20, cars out front." Ethan quietly said, "Walk with me." They moved through the hospital like a tide going out. The pediatric wing door stayed shut. He didn't press it open. He let the distance be a promise instead of a cage. Outside, the day had decided to be generous, sun tempered by a breeze that knew how to mind its manners. The car door opened. He paused. Ethan quietly said, "Leela." She straightened, pen ready. Ethan quietly said, "No gifts for Friday. No camera. If anyone in comms tries to spin it, they're off the account. And facilities, replace the 6th-floor lights with something that doesn't make people feel like suspects." Leela softly said, "Already on it." He almost smiled. Power is loud, care is quiet. The world notices one and remembers the other. The call with Singapore slid by indisciplined choreography, charts, burn rates, a competitor's rumor stuffed back into its box. He spoke cleanly, the kind of calm he usually hired. But under each sentence was a new bass line: "Friday at noon. Back of the room. Clap the exact right amount." After, Legal lined his desk with red ink. He signed where promises hid in paragraphs. He didn't miss. He didn't grandstand. He didn't forget the sticker on Liam's shirt. As evening leaned its shoulder against the glass of his office, the city turned its lights on, one apartment at a time, each rectangle declaring, "Someone lives here." He stood at the piano. The cover slid back like a sigh being allowed out. He sat. Hands hovered above keys that remembered him better than he remembered himself. He pressed one note, then another. The room filled with a kind of truth that didn't mind being imperfect. Ethan quietly said, "Morning song." The melody that children learn first, simple, clear, honest, spilled into the air. His right hand searched. His left found home like a prodigal. He played it again, slower, with the care of a man stitching a wound he'd carried like fashion. His phone buzzed, an unknown number. He let it ring. It buzzed again, then offered a voicemail. He ignored it. The third time it texted. "Unknown, this is Ms. Ruth, Liam's teacher. Amara gave me your number only because Liam insisted you should know the exact time. Friday, 12:30, back row. Ethan exhaled, a laugh hitching a ride with relief. He typed, Ethan, thank you. I will be respectful. A bubble blinked, stopped, started again. Ms. Ruth, respectful is good. Quiet phones, soft claps, and sir, don't break that boy's heart. He put the phone face down. The piano, delighted by the attention, begged for another minute. He obliged until the melody felt like a promise he might keep. Night found him in the kitchen with a pan he hadn't used in a year. Eggs surrendered. Bread browned. He ate standing up like a sinner, then laughed at himself and sat down like a person. The penthouse felt less like an exhibit and more like a place where someone practiced being human. When a man starts choosing small goodness over large performance, heaven takes notes. Morning folded into Thursday. He did the difficult things, the boring kindnesses that make empires less cruel. Ethan quietly said, approve childcare stipends for shift workers. Ethan quietly said, foundation trucks add 2 rural routes. Ethan quietly said, tell R/D to go home at 8, lock the lights at 9. If someone needs more, they can ask me, not the darkness. People blinked, systems adjusted, not because he had changed the world, but because he had taken his hand off its throat. By afternoon, a message appeared from an address without a name. One line, no signature. He likes green apples, not red. He read it 3 times, a grin cracking his practiced face. He typed, deleted, typed again, then closed the window. He didn't need to answer. He needed to arrive with the right fruit and the right silence. He went home early. The city noticed and did what cities do. It kept moving. He showered. He ironed his shirt himself, a comical act that ended with decent sleeves and a small burn he considered a fair tax for rejoining the living. He bought green apples with his own hands from a corner shop, where the clerk didn't care who he was as long as he didn't bruise the produce. He placed them in a paper bag like treasure. Sleep found him before midnight, not because he conquered it, but because he stopped trying to wrestle a gift. The longest road home is often just a left turn you kept refusing to make. Friday woke with clean light. He was at his desk at 7, but his mind was already sitting in a small chair behind smaller chairs, rehearsing how to be ordinary. At 11:50, Leela hovered. Leela softly said, car. Ethan quietly said, no, I'll walk from the corner. Her eyebrows rose, approval disguised as neutrality. Leela softly said, text me if you need extraction. Ethan quietly said, if I need extraction from a first-grade recital, call an ambulance. He left without entourage, the city obliged by not staring. He reached the school, brick, hand-painted banners, a yard that had seen both scraped knees and revolutionary treaties between 7-year-olds. Inside, a woman with a clipboard pointed him politely toward a sign that said, Parents Right Arrow Auditorium, in marker that had tried its best. He stood at the back, where dust motes rehearsed their own choreography in the light. The room hummed with the bright chaos of small humans in neat rows. A piano waited stage left, proud to be part of the story. He checked his phone, silent. He checked the apples, intact. He checked his heart, reckless but willing. A side door opened. Children filed in, a parade of courage wrapped in cotton. Liam came third, shirt tucked, hair arguing with order, sticker from a different day still holding on like loyalty. He scanned the room. For a second he looked lost. Then he saw Ethan. A small smile, controlled with heroic effort, flickered and settled. He lifted his hand an inch, permission asking to be a wave. Ethan answered with the tiniest nod a man can make while feeling like a cathedral ringing bells. Amara appeared behind the children, her posture a wall against chaos and a window for grace. Her eyes swept the back row, found him, lingered a beat that said, remember the rules. He nodded again. She looked away first. He took that as mercy. Ms. Ruth brightly said, welcome, everyone. Today our class will share the songs we've been learning. We clap softly for courage, and we save the loudest claps for the end, when everyone has been brave. Applause like rain on a tin roof. The first child played 3 notes that sounded like 5 and earned a smile big enough to be a sunrise. Another sang a bar of something no one recognized, and a parent wept like it was opera. Then it was Liam's turn. He sat at the piano with the dignity of a small king asked to sign a treaty. He placed his hands. He looked at the keys as if they were secrets entrusted to him. He began. Morning Song entered the room, halting, honest, beautiful. His right hand told the truth. His left found it and held it. In measure 4, he stumbled. He paused. He breathed. Somewhere in the back, a man who had made markets move lowered his eyes and prayed a prayer that had only one word, please. Liam lifted his chin. He started again from the beginning. This time his courage kept time. At the final note, he did what all brave children do. He looked for his person. Ethan clapped exactly the right amount. Not an ounce more, not a grain less. His eyes blurred anyway. Liam grinned and did not hide it. He returned to his place in line, a small lion among other small lions. Amara, at the side, allowed herself one breath's worth of smile before she folded it back into composure. She glanced at Ethan as if to say, so far, so good. Keep choosing good. Mr. Hope, voiceover. Sometimes redemption starts with a soft clap in the back row, and a bag of green apples no one asked you to bring. As the class bowed in the universal choreography of children being adored by people who would do anything for them, Ms. Ruth raised a hand. Ms. Ruth brightly said, there's one more thing. Liam, would you like to give your guest something? Liam's eyes darted to Amara. She nodded, permission on loan. He walked to the back, solemn, important. Ethan knelt to make the world the right size. Liam softly said, for you. He held out a piece of paper, a drawing, 3 figures under a wonky sun, one tall, one with a dress, one small. The tall one had hazel eyes colored carefully. All 3 were holding hands. Ethan quietly said, it's perfect. Liam softly said, Ms. Ruth says families can look different but still be a family. The sentence undid him with kindness. Ethan quietly said, she's very wise. Amara stood a few paces away, close enough to intercept, far enough to allow. Her eyes searched his face for the thing she needed to see. Restraint, steadiness, no hunger that would swallow a child whole. He held the drawing like scripture. He reached into the bag and produced a green apple. Ethan quietly said, I brought something, if your mom says it's okay. Liam looked up at Amara. Amara softly said, one after lunch. Liam softly said, deal. Ethan placed the apple in Liam's hands, as if passing a torch between equal flames. The room emptied in cheerful knots. Parents negotiated exits with tiny negotiators. Ms. Ruth hugged children the way saints bless pilgrims. Amara approached, the air around her warming and warning at the same time. Amara softly said, you followed the rules. Ethan quietly said, I'm learning new ones. She considered him, then the drawing in his hand. Amara softly said, he drew that this morning, I didn't ask him to. Ethan quietly said, I'll keep it safe. She nodded once, a verdict delayed, not denied. And just like that, a man who built skylines discovered the holy architecture of a soft clap, a green apple, and a picture drawn with crayons that wouldn't stay inside the lines, because love rarely does. Second chances don't arrive with trumpets. They come like soft instructions. Sit in the back, clap lightly, bring green apples, leave your pride at home. If you can obey small rules, life will risk giving you larger ones. The auditorium emptied into a hallway scented with tempera paint and old victories. Children compared stickers like medals. Parents negotiated naps as if signing peace treaties. Ethan stood aside, holding a crayon drawing the way a man holds a fragile map back to someplace he used to live. Amara guided Liam through the knot of legs and backpacks that effortless shepherding mothers learn from loving more than they rest. She stopped a few feet from Ethan, measuring both the distance and the reasons for it. Amara softly said, "We're going to the courtyard for 10 minutes, son, before homework." Ethan quietly said, "May I walk with you?" A gate, then. Amara softly said, 10 minutes. They stepped into a small brick courtyard where a sapling tried very hard to be a tree. Benches held the tired joy of people who'd gotten through something honest. Liam hopped from square to square, inventing a game where the cracks were lava and survival required giggling. Ethan stood beside Amara, close enough to listen, far enough to be temporary. Ethan quietly said, "He was brave." Amara softly said, "He practiced until the neighbors knew the song by heart." Ethan quietly said, "The left hand found home." Her eyes flicked to him. Recognition. He could speak piano, he had remembered the language. Liam circled back, hands behind his back like a tiny professor. Liam softly said, "Ms. Ruth says we can have fruit if it's not sticky." Amara raised an eyebrow. Amara softly said, "And did you bring a fruit that is sticky?" Liam looked at Ethan, the way a child looks at a magician right before asking for a rabbit. Ethan produced a green apple from the paper bag, as if it were a treaty. Ethan quietly said, "If the court permits." Amara softly said, "1 slice." Ethan found the pocket knife he carried for opening boxes and old habits. He looked at Amara for permission. She nodded. He cut careful wedges, passing them to Liam in the napkin he'd folded twice to look like restraint. Juice beaded, then behaved. Liam softly said, "Green apples make your mouth think." Ethan quietly said, "And what did it think today?" Liam softly said, "That my hands are smarter than they were last week." Ethan laughed, surprised by how quickly joy could find his face. The sun shifted, warm enough to loosen shoulders. A wind ruffled the paper bag. Somewhere a bell decided time had passed. Amara watched Liam savor the last slice, then tucked the napkin into her bag with the muscle memory of women who never leave a mess for someone else to clean. Ethan quietly said, "I want to do this right." Amara softly said, "Right is a long road, it's also a slow one." He nodded. Slowness had never been his talent. Maybe that's why it felt holy. Ethan quietly said, "Can I ask the hospital the other day, is he?" Amara didn't flinch. She was not ashamed of truth. Amara softly said, "Reactive airway, small lungs that don't like certain surprises. We carry an inhaler. He's learning the signs." Ethan's throat worked around a new kind of fear, the kind with small hands. Ethan quietly said, "Triggers." Amara softly said, "Cold air, dust. Big worry, he's good at telling me when his chest feels tight. We monitor, he's okay." Ethan's mind, designed to problem solve, opened spreadsheets no one could see. Filters, humidifiers, travel routes that avoid cold wind tunnels between buildings. A list of carpets that would never meet this child. He shut it gently. Ethan quietly said, "Thank you for telling me." Amara softly said, "Information doesn't equal access, it equals responsibility." A sentence to keep, engraved on the inside of his ribs. Liam climbed onto the bench between them, the diplomatic position. He studied the drawing in Ethan's hand and nodded like an artist satisfied with his work. Liam softly said, "You can put it on your fridge." Ethan blinked. It had been years since his fridge held anything but schedules and silence. Ethan quietly said, "I will." Liam softly said, "You have magnets." Ethan quietly said, "I will." Amara almost smiled, almost. Clouds slipped in front of the sun with the drama of theater curtains. A breeze threaded the courtyard. Liam rubbed his chest in the small, absent way that alarms mothers. Amara's hand went to her bag, inhaler known and ready. Amara softly said, "How's your breath?" Liam softly said, "Just thinking." Amara softly said, "Take a sip anyway." He did, practiced, bored with survival in the way children become. Color returned to his cheeks like someone turned the saturation back up. Ethan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Ethan quietly said, "May I carry an extra, in case?" Amara considered the ask. It wasn't grand. It was daily. It was the exact shape of fatherhood, a pocket ready for the emergency that probably won't come and the vow to be there if it does. Amara softly said, "I'll give you one. It doesn't mean you get to take him places without me." Ethan quietly said, "Understood." She took out a spare inhaler, labeled, the handwriting neat enough to be a warning. She placed it in his palm. He held it like a relic. Mr. Hope, voiceover. Some holy objects are not made of gold. They're plastic and labeled and fit in a pocket close to a man's pulse. A clap of thunder rolled somewhere too far to be weather and too near to be ignored. The breeze sharpened. Teachers called to children in tones that gently outranked curiosity. Amara softly said, "We should go." Liam slid off the bench, slipping his small hand into hers like a promise he had no intention of breaking. He looked back at Ethan. Liam softly said, "Are you coming to the next one?" He glanced at Amara. The courtroom of her eyes convened. He waited for the ruling. Amara softly said, "We'll see." Ethan quietly said, "I'll be where I'm allowed to be." The phrase landed right, not needy, not performative, just true. They walked to the gate. A parent recognized Ethan too late to make a scene. The moment passed like a storm that decides to spare your street. At the curb, traffic negotiated its own ethics. Amara checked for the light, for gaps, for drivers who believed in brakes. Liam jumped over a crack that was still lava until proven otherwise. On the corner stood a small shop with a bell on the door and the faith to stock both pencils and bread. Amara paused. Amara softly said, "We need milk." She turned to Ethan, a test drawn in pencil. Amara softly said, "You can wait outside." He nodded. He could wait anywhere now that he knew what he was waiting for. Through the glass, he watched simple economics between people who still knew each other's names. Amara placed a carton on the counter. Liam added a cheap comic with the stealth of children who want stories more than sugar. The shopkeeper rang up patience. Amara shook her head at the comic. Liam negotiated with a look. The shopkeeper slipped the comic into the bag and winked. Amara pretended not to see in the way parents do when the small kindness is worth the inconsistency. They reemerged to a sky, doing its best impression of rain. Amara softly said, "We're a bus ride away. You don't have to." Ethan quietly said, "I'll walk you to the stop." Another permission, another inch. They moved as a unit that didn't know its name yet. Sidewalk, puddle, a shoe that wasn't waterproof and a child who didn't care. Ethan stepped off the curb to let a stroller pass and without thinking reached to steady the stroller's handle. The mother mouthed thank you and kept moving. The world did not applaud, which is how you know something good actually happened. At the bus stop, a bench offered 3 seats and the history of 1,000 conversations. They stood. Liam softly said, "Can you tie laces?" Ethan knelt. His hands remembered faster than his mind did. The bunny ears, the loop, the pull. Muscle memory is just love written on the body. Ethan quietly said, "There." Liam softly said, "You did it right." Ethan quietly said, "I practiced." Amara watched the bow sit snug on the shoe, a small, tidy symbol that sometimes a man learns the lesson. The bus arrived with brakes that complained about their job. The doors sighed open. Amara softly said, "This is us." Ethan stepped back. He did not reach for a wallet or insist on an Uber. He honored the route as if it were sacred because today it was. Ethan quietly said, "May I call?" to ask how he's doing sometimes, not to intrude, to learn how to be useful. Amara studied him. She weighed 7 years against 7 minutes and the weight didn't balance yet, but the scale had stopped being broken. Amara softly said, "Text first. I answer when I can, no calls after 8. If he's asleep, he stays asleep. Ethan quietly said, agreed. She pulled a small card from her bag, simple, her name, a number. No last names, no titles, a line between necessary and none of your business. She handed it over. He slid it into his wallet behind the black card that opened too many doors that never led home. Liam softly said, bye. He lifted his hand to high-five. Ethan met it, the sound soft as before. The driver checked mirrors with the ritual of bus drivers everywhere. Amara ushered Liam up the steps. She paused, turned back for one sentence more. Amara softly said, don't let anyone take us into the papers. If that happens, we're done. Ethan quietly said, no one will know anything I don't earn the right to tell. She nodded, the doors closed. The bus pulled away like a ship departing a harbor with room for hope. And there it was, a contract written in soft rules and ordinary moments. An inhaler, a text curfew, a bow and a shoelace done right. These are not small things. These are the laws of a new country called beginning again. That night, Ethan did an unusual thing for a man like him. He went home before dark and didn't apologize to a single shareholder. He pinned the drawing to his refrigerator with a magnet he bought from the corner shop on the walk back. A ridiculous souvenir shaped like a smiling sun. The paper hung slightly crooked, as if insisting that perfection stay out of this house for a while. He placed the spare inhaler in the bowl by the door where keys sleep. He added a pack of tissues, a small bottle of hand sanitizer, and a folded note with Amara's rules written in his own hand. Text first. No gifts. No cameras. No promises you can't keep. Breathe before you speak. He read the list once like prayer and once like policy. The phone vibrated. Unknown, he says the apple tasted like Saturdays. He stared, he smiled, he typed, then erased twice. He sent nothing. Sometimes agreement is better than applause. He made himself dinner that looked like someone tried, and that was the point. He washed the plate. He sat at the piano. He played morning song once for the boy and once for the man who had finally remembered to clap softly for the right things. Tomorrow would ask more of him. It always does. But tonight, the house had a picture on the fridge and a bowl by the door where a father kept a small blue promise, and the world for once seemed willing to meet him halfway. Some love stories begin with roses. The good ones begin with air, clean, steady, shared. Monday broke like a glass that decided not to shatter. Ethan arrived early and did the unglamorous work of making a life breathable. Not grand gestures, not headlines, just air. Ethan quietly said, facilities air quality audit for all floors, replace filters this week, humidifiers in the dry zones. He paused, then sent a second message he'd drafted 3 times. Ethan quietly said, Foundation offer a quiet grant to the school district for classroom purifiers, nurse supplies, emergency inhalers. No plaques, no press. If they insist on a name, use the anonymous fund. Replies returned like nods. The world does move when a man moves it with his hands open instead of clenched. He stared at the refrigerator photo he'd set as his phone wallpaper, 3 figures under a stubborn sun, and then at the little card in his wallet with a number that mattered more than every board seat he'd ever held. He typed and deleted before sending the smallest message a proud man can send. Ethan, texting first as agreed. How did he sleep? The dots blinked, rested, blinked. Amara, fine, we're walking to school. Light cough last night. Better now, math test today. Ethan, rooting for long division. Amara, mixed operations, pray bigger. He smiled into his coffee like a fool and let it be. Mr. Hope, voiceover. When a man chooses smallness on purpose, heaven leans forward to see if he's serious. Before noon, he met with HR, not to announce a program, but to change a temperature, the temperature of working here. Ethan quietly said, childcare stipends go live Friday. Caregivers can choose cash or credits. No forms that punish poverty. Make it easy. If it's hard, we failed. A manager opened his mouth with a no dressed like a question. Ethan held up a palm. Ethan quietly said, "If your spreadsheet can't find a heart, get a new spreadsheet." The meeting ended early because mercy, when it's genuine, shorten speeches. At 1:30, Ms. Ruth sent a photo of a row of apples, one with a bite missing shaped exactly like a small boy's enthusiasm. "Ms. Ruth, he says green helps math. Who am I to argue?" "Ethan, do not argue with genius." He saved the picture like water and turned back to a world that, for once, felt correctly sized. Afternoon brought a text that felt like a door being cracked on purpose. "Amara, if you're free at 4, there's a park on Linden. 20 minutes, no gifts." He stared at the time like it was a living thing. He had a 5 o'clock that was suddenly very movable. "Ethan, I'll be there at 3:58. I'll leave at 4:20. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. The rule was the reply. He walked the last 2 blocks to the park alone, jacket off, sleeves rolled, the city loud and forgivable. Linden Park was the kind of place where neighborhood kingdoms rise, one swing at a time. A construction site a block away blew a thin chalk of dust across the afternoon like a careless promise. Amara sat on a bench with a paperback and the posture of a woman who never truly puts her vigilance down. Liam, at the field's edge, held a kite that believed in itself. The sky, kind for once, agreed. Liam spotted Ethan and performed the serious, contained excitement of a child trying to be cool. Liam softly said, "It's windy enough." Ethan quietly said, "Then we have no excuse." He jogged to the field's edge with Liam. Amara lifted her eyes from the book but not her attention from him. The kite trembled like a brave thing. Liam softly said, "On 3, 1, 2. They ran. The kite rose, doubted, rose again. Liam whooped, then turned it into a cough as surprise met lungs that sometimes argued with joy. Amara softly said, "Slow, breathe." She was beside them already, the inhaler in her hand like an act of faith. Liam took a measured puff, held, released, then tried to turn the episode into a shrug. Ethan quietly said, "Count with me." He matched Amara's cadence. Ethan quietly said, "In 2, 3, out 2, 3. A minute, then 2. Color returned to Liam's cheeks, the stubborn sun inside him refusing to set. Amara softly said, "Good, again." They breathed together, mother-son man learning. The wind, chastened by instruction, gentled. Liam softly said, "I'm okay." Amara softly said, "Then we play small, no sprints." Ethan nodded. Boundaries were not fences, they were ways home. They walked the kite instead of racing it, letting it swim against the sky like something tamed by kindness. Liam's laugh returned, shaped by breath and wisdom. On the bench, Amara wiped a thin film of grit from the page, with a thumb that had long ago learned to multitask hope and caution. Ethan quietly said, "The construction dust, should we move?" Amara softly said, "After 5 it dies down, he wanted the kite, we came early." Ethan quietly said, "Thank you for letting me be here." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, an old habit that shouldn't have hurt him to see and did. Amara softly said, "You did well." He took the sentence like medicine and didn't overdose. They sat a while, the world thinned to essential sounds, rope against skin, pages against thumb, a basketball's hollow morality sermon off to the left. A small dog considered everyone and forgave them. Ethan quietly said, "I've arranged an air purifier grant for the district. Quiet, through a fund, no names." Amara's eyes cut to his, sharp and uncertain. He raised both hands like a man approaching a bird. Ethan quietly said, "It's for all the classrooms, not a gift for him, a gift for air." She let the sentence stand, weighed, then put it down without throwing it away. Amara softly said, "If the principal asks for a press release, say no." Ethan quietly said, I already did. A corner of her mouth conceded something small. Mr. Hope voiceover. Trust is the slowest currency. The exchange rate improves with ordinary consistency. At 4:18, Ethan stood. Ethan quietly said, 2 minutes left. Amara closed her book, a ribbon marking a sentence that would have to wait. Amara softly said, you can walk us to the bus. They moved as three again, bench to gate, gate to sidewalk, sidewalk to stop. The bus exhaled its indifference and took other stories with it. They waited for the next. Liam softly said, can we get a juice? Amara looked at the clock above the bodega, a sovereign's glance. Amara softly said, at home. Ethan quietly said, there's a store on my corner that sells the kind that pretends it's fruit. Amara softly said, and charges triple. Ethan quietly said, they charge me quadruple. I stand it because they sell the right magnets. It slipped out. Amara's eyes lifted. Amara softly said, you put it on the fridge. Ethan quietly said, crooked on purpose. A beat, a truce that smelled like bread. The bus yawned to a stop. Liam climbed on with the confidence of a commuter who knows his stop is where his mother is. Amara paused at the top step. Amara softly said, he has a clinic checkup Thursday at 3. If you want to wait in the lobby, you can. No consulting the doctor, no opinions, no CEO. Ethan quietly said, I can be furniture. Amara softly said, chairs don't interrupt. Ethan quietly said, understood. She hesitated, then added a mercy. Amara softly said, he liked the breathing count. Ethan quietly said, so did I. The bus closed around them and left him with a street that had learned his name. He walked back slowly, not savoring, respecting. The phone vibrated. He didn't recognize the number, but recognized the tone the moment he answered. Voice coldly said, Ethan. His mother's voice had the expensive softness of a hotel towel that never quite dries you. Ethan quietly said, Mother. Mother coolly said, you've been making quaint appearances. St. Augustine a school, a park. Do remember, dear, your life is watched by people who move markets and armies. He stopped under a plane tree that had seen better winters. Ethan quietly said, are you having me followed? Mother coolly said, I'm having you protected. You seem to be in a phase. Ethan quietly said, the word is life. Mother coolly said, the girl contacted you again, I assume. Opportunists sense weather. He closed his eyes and tasted old copper again. Ethan quietly said, her name is Amara, and if you or anyone who works for you contact her, the school, or the clinic, I will cut off the endowment that allows your board to pretend at benevolence. Silence real for once moved through the wire. Mother coolly said, empty threats don't suit you. Ethan quietly said, it isn't empty, and it isn't a threat, it's a boundary. A small laugh from her, surgical amused. Mother coolly said, did she teach you that word? Ethan quietly said, yes. He ended the call, not dramatically, precisely. A man can learn to put down a knife without dropping it. Some men win their first war by losing the appetite for it. At home, the light through the windows had decided to be kind. He washed his hands like a ritual, then set the spare inhaler back in the bowl by the door and added a second, labeled, his handwriting imitating Amara's neatness with a humility that suited him. He opened his laptop and wrote a short email to legal, stripped of their customary armor. Ethan quietly said, new policy, no investigations into employees' families without cause, no shadow checks. If you can't defend it in daylight, we don't do it. He hit send, the little whoosh sounding like a small freedom. Dinner was a pan and an onion that tried to make him cry and failed. He plated food that looked honest. He ate at the table. He put his phone face down and his fork to work. It buzzed once, he left it. Twice, he let it. The third time, he flipped it over with the mild annoyance of a man who has something better than interruption. Amara, he says the kite flew because Mr. Ethan's legs are long. I told him kites fly for wind and practice. He said practice is just long legs for your hands. He laughed alone at his table like a man who isn't alone. Ethan, he is correct, of course. Amara, Thursday 3, East Entrance, be a chair. Ethan understood. He put the phone down again, then picked it up and added one more line he rewrote twice to make sure it carried the right weight. Ethan, thank you for trusting me with air. No answer came and none was owed. He moved to the piano and played Morning Song without apology, adding a left-hand line that felt like a promise no one could hear or break. The melody finished. The room held the last note longer than physics requires. Air had been shared. Lines had been drawn and kept. A mother had set terms. A man had agreed to be furniture. And somewhere between a kite's string and 3 even breaths, a family began to practice staying. Tomorrow would bring clinics and old ghosts with expensive shoes. But tonight, a drawing hung crooked on a fridge on purpose, and a bowl by the door held 2 blue promises ready. Some days are battles you win by not moving, by sitting where you're told, by speaking when asked, by letting the clock keep its own authority. Thursday arrived wrapped in gray clouds that promised nothing but traffic. Ethan left early, refusing the car for the last stretch, walking the wet pavement toward St. Augustine Private with the air of a man determined to keep an appointment with humility. He carried nothing but his phone, wallet, and the inhaler in his jacket pocket, his quiet credential. The east entrance smelled faintly of rain mixed with antiseptic. He scanned the lobby for Amara and Liam but didn't step toward the pediatric wing. Instead, he sat in a corner chair, hands folded, a man-sized punctuation mark. At 3:02 they arrived. Liam, in a navy sweater too big for him, spotted Ethan first. His wave was subtle, not wanting to violate whatever invisible rules he knew his mother had drawn. Ethan lifted his hand in return, half wave, half salute. Amara followed a step behind, her expression neutral, but her eyes swept him as if checking for violations. No flowers, no toys, no spectacle. Amara softly said, "You're early." Ethan quietly said, "Traffic lied to me about how long it would take. I decided not to punish punctuality." A corner of her mouth almost moved. They checked in at the desk. Ethan didn't follow. He stayed in his seat, watching them disappear through the pediatric door. The moment it closed, the lobby's chatter felt louder. Across from him, an elderly man leafed through a weathered magazine. 2 chairs down, a young mother bounced a baby whose lungs seemed determined to test the building's acoustics. A nurse in teal passed, did a double take, and then approached with cautious recognition. Nurse softly said, "Mr. Cole, you were here last week, weren't you?" Ethan quietly said, "Yes." She smiled, more curious than deferential. Nurse softly said, "I noticed the air purifiers arrived this morning. Kids' ward is already easier to breathe in. Whoever donated them, bless them." Ethan inclined his head, not confirming, not denying. Ethan quietly said, "Then it was worth doing." She moved on, her steps lighter. Mr. Hope, voiceover. A man doesn't need his name on the plaque if he can breathe the difference. The pediatric door opened 20 minutes later. Liam emerged with a sticker shaped like a rocket and the posture of someone who had endured important questions. Liam softly said, "All clear, just growing." Amara softly said, "He's up 2 centimeters since last visit." Ethan quietly said, "That's impressive. At this rate, you'll outgrow that sweater by Tuesday." Liam grinned, then busied himself peeling the sticker to put it on his sleeve. They stepped toward the exit together, but halfway down the hall, a voice froze the air. Voice coldly said, "Ethan." He turned. His mother stood near the visitor's desk, perfectly tailored, her silver brooch catching the overhead light. The look on her face was the same one she'd used when board members disappointed her, controlled disdain with a garnish of pity. Mother coolly said, "I didn't realize your appointments included playground company." Ethan's spine went cold. Amara's shoulders stiffened beside him. Ethan quietly said, "Mother, this isn't the time." Her eyes slid to Amara and Liam, assessing them the way some people assess art they don't intend to buy. Mother coolly said, "And this must be the reason for your recent charity streak." Liam looked between them, not understanding the words but catching the temperature. Amara softly said, "Come on, Liam." She began steering him toward the doors. Ethan didn't move. Ethan quietly said, "If you speak to her again without my consent, you won't be speaking to me at all." A small, sharp smile curved his mother's lips. Mother coolly said, "Still romanticizing your rebellions, I see." Ethan quietly said, "No, I'm protecting what's mine." For a fraction of a second, her composure cracked, surprise, maybe even hurt, but it vanished before it could be named. Mother coolly said, "You sound just like your father." Ethan quietly said, "That's the last person I want to sound like." He turned, catching up to Amara and Liam at the door. Outside, rain had started in small, deliberate drops. Liam tilted his head back to catch them on his face. Liam softly said, "Feels like the kite day." Amara softly said, "Let's keep the running to a minimum." Ethan glanced at her, reading the tension she carried like an extra bag. Ethan quietly said, "I didn't know she'd be here, I'm sorry." Amara softly said, "You can't control where she goes. You can control if she gets to come near us." Ethan quietly said, "She won't." They reached the curb. The bus stop was close enough to see. Amara checked her watch. Amara softly said, "We're fine from here." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. Ethan quietly said, "Text me when you're home." Amara softly said, "If I remember." Liam waved without looking back, his attention on a worm inching bravely across the wet sidewalk. Ethan stood until the bus swallowed them, the drawing on his fridge replaying in his mind like a compass. Some storms make noise, others move in silence until you realize your whole sky has been replaced. Ethan had lived his life in the noise, but this storm, this one was going to be quiet, deliberate, and aimed. By Friday morning, his mother's voice was still in his head, not the words, but the tone. That expensive calm that had always made him doubt himself when he was younger. He stood in his penthouse kitchen, staring at the crooked drawing on the fridge, and knew he wasn't going to let that tone reach Liam again. He called his head of security. Ethan quietly said, "From this moment, no one from my family, no assistants, no drivers, no board members, goes anywhere near Amara Bennett or Liam Bennett without my written approval. If they try, I want to know before they're in the building." Security chief softly said, "Do you want me to alert them to the restriction?" Ethan quietly said, "No, let them find out when it stops them. Quiet walls, not public fences." He hung up and opened another call, this time to the Foundation's legal counsel. Ethan quietly said, "We're revising the bylaws. Endowment payouts can no longer be tied to my personal schedule or activities. If my mother wants her projects funded, they'll be approved on merit, not dinner invitations." There was a long pause on the other end. Counsel softly said, "She's not going to like that." Ethan quietly said, "That's the point." Later that afternoon, Amara texted, "Amara, school S closed Monday for repairs. Liam will be with me at the library if you want to visit. 1 hour, no gifts, don't interrupt homework." Ethan, "I'll bring coffee for you. Nothing for him on time, quiet." No reply came. That was answer enough. Monday, the library smelled of paper, dust, and the faint sweetness of crayons. Liam sat at a small table in the children's section, pencil in hand, tongue caught between his teeth as he worked through math problems. Amara sat across from him, reading, hair loose around her shoulders. It struck Ethan how much softer she looked when her guard was down, even if only by degrees. He approached slowly, holding 2 coffees in plain cups. Ethan quietly said, "For you." Amara softly said, "Thank you." He sat in the chair beside Liam, careful not to block the boy's light. Ethan quietly said, "What's on the agenda?" Liam softly said, "Fractions. They're like sharing but with rules." Ethan quietly said, "Sharing always has rules." For 20 minutes, Ethan was silent except to answer the occasional math question. It felt strangely good to be part of something without having to control it. When Liam took a short break, heading toward the picture books, Amara closed her novel. Amara softly said, "I heard about what happened at the hospital, your mother." He kept his eyes on the coffee in his hands. Ethan quietly said, "She doesn't get to be near you again, I've made sure." Amara studied him. Amara softly said, "That's a promise you can't keep unless you change how you've always lived." Ethan quietly said, "I already have, quietly. I'm building walls where they can't see them." She tilted her head slightly, the faintest recognition in her eyes. Amara softly said, "You're not doing this for me." Ethan quietly said, "No, I'm doing it for him, and for the man I'd like him to see when he looks at me." They sat in the pause that followed, the air between them more cooperative than it had been in years. When a man begins dismantling his own house to rebuild it stronger, you don't rush to praise him. You wait to see if he can live in the draft. That night, Ethan got a call from his mother's assistant, clipped, cautious. Assistant softly said, "Your mother was turned away from the school gates today. She says the guards were unhelpful." Ethan quietly said, "They were doing their job." Assistant softly said, "She insists you're overreacting." Ethan quietly said, "Tell her I'm just getting started." He hung up, walked to the fridge, and looked at the crooked drawing. For the first time in years, he realized he wasn't staring at what he'd lost. He was staring at what he was in the middle of building. The storm had arrived, but this time, he wasn't the one running for cover. This time, he was the one holding the roof in place. Trust doesn't arrive all at once. It comes like daylight through blinds, thin at first, then widening, but never without the lines that keep it measured. By Wednesday, the effects of Ethan's quiet changes had started to ripple. The school nurse sent an email to all parents. New air purifiers in every classroom, filters changed monthly, no cost to the district. No name on the donation, no photo op, no speeches. Amara noticed. Amara saw the school's announcement that you're doing. Ethan, yes. Amara, thank you, you kept it quiet. Ethan, that's how air should be, they're not announced. No emoji, no follow-up, but the thanks was typed without reluctance. For Ethan, that was a headline. Friday evening, another message arrived. Amara, Liam has soccer practice tomorrow morning. You can watch from the bleachers. No snacks, no gifts, no coaching. Ethan understood, back row, quiet. The next morning smelled of damp grass and cheap coffee from a folding table run by a parent volunteer. Ethan found a seat halfway up the metal bleachers. The field spread out in front of him, little legs in bright jerseys chasing something bigger than the ball, belonging. Liam was on the blue team, hair already resisting the comb. He spotted Ethan as the team jogged past and gave a quick, secret nod before returning to formation. Amara stood near the other parents, her stance loose but watchful. Ethan didn't approach. He clapped when everyone clapped, no louder, no sooner. Halfway through practice, a shout went up. One of the boys had tripped, holding his ankle. Coaches jogged over. Kids gathered in the half-circle children form when they're worried but curious. It was Liam, but Ethan noticed him kneel beside the boy, saying something that made the other child laugh despite the tears. Later, during a water break, Liam wandered over to the bleachers, careful not to look like he was breaking any rule. Liam softly said, "He's okay, just scared. My coach says I'm good at telling people they're fine even when they feel wobbly." Ethan quietly said, "That's a talent worth keeping." Liam softly said, "Do you get wobbly?" Ethan considered. Ethan quietly said, "Sometimes. I'm learning how to tell myself I'm fine, too." A whistle blew. Liam ran back, leaving Ethan with the kind of sentence you fold in your pocket for later. After practice, Amara walked over with Liam. Amara softly said, "We're going to the community center. He has art class." She hesitated, then added. Amara softly said, "You can come in, sit in the back, just watch." It was the first time she'd invited him into something indoors, something routine. Not a public recital, not a park, but a small room where Liam's life actually happened. The community center smelled of paint, clay, and the faint tang of floor cleaner. A dozen kids sat at long tables, paper spread out, jars of brushes like small bouquets. Liam waved briefly before dipping a brush into blue paint with the seriousness of a craftsman. Ethan sat in a folding chair at the far wall. He didn't speak. He didn't check his phone. He watched Liam layer colors, blue sky, green field, a house with 3 figures in front. When class ended, Liam held up the painting. Liam softly said, "This is for my room, but I can make you one if you want." Ethan quietly said, "I'd like that only if you have time." Amara glanced at Ethan. There was no rebuke in her eyes this time, just the watchfulness of someone still deciding what to do with the evidence of changed behavior. The edges of permission are where most people fail, where they push too far, too fast. But if you can stand at the edge without leaning over, sometimes the ground shifts on its own. That evening his phone buzzed. "Amara, he wants to drop the painting at your place when it's dry. I'll come with him, short visit, rules apply." Ethan typed back, then deleted, then typed again. Ethan understood, "Thank you." He stared at the crooked drawing on his fridge. Soon it might have company. Some people change by adding, others change by removing. Ethan had spent years filling his life with things that impressed everyone but the people who mattered. Now, he was learning that sometimes the truest preparation for guests is to make room. Saturday afternoon carried a thin winter sun, the kind that warmed only the top of your coat. Ethan had been moving quietly all morning, not cleaning for show, but shifting the house toward something human. The dining table, once a stage for board dinners, now held nothing but a bowl of green apples and 2 mugs without logos. The spare inhaler sat by the door in its usual place. The fridge still displayed Liam's crayon drawing, crooked on purpose, the magnet a smiling son he'd chosen from the corner shop. Next to it, Ethan had left an empty space, a place ready for something new. At 2:04, the intercom buzzed. Amara softly said, "We're here." He pressed the button. Ethan quietly said, "Come up." When the elevator doors opened, Liam stepped out first, holding the painting wrapped in brown paper with the solemnity of a courier on royal business. Amara followed, scanning the hallway before her eyes landed on Ethan. Liam softly said, "It's dry now." Ethan quietly said, "Then let's give it the ceremony it deserves." They stepped inside. Liam's eyes widened, not at wealth, but at the difference from the last time he'd seen the world of adults. There were fewer sharp edges, more light. A tall plant stood by the window where the skyline used to be the only view. A low shelf near the entry held books and a small basket of puzzles. Amara noticed. Amara softly said, "You've changed things." Ethan quietly said, "I had more space than I needed. Now I'm trying to have the right kind." Liam walked straight to the fridge. He pointed to the empty space. Liam softly said, "That's for this one." Ethan took the painting from its wrapping. It was a blue sky, a green hill, and again, 3 figures in front of a house. But this time the tall one was holding a kite string. He knelt so Liam could place the magnet himself. Ethan quietly said, perfect. Liam softly said, it's straight this time. Ethan quietly said, we'll see if it stays that way. Amara lingered by the window, looking at the plant, the softened furniture arrangement, the absence of anything that felt like a showroom. Amara softly said, it's quieter in here. Ethan quietly said, it's easier to breathe. The words hung there, not just about air. Liam tugged Ethan toward the shelf with the puzzles. Liam softly said, can we do one? Amara softly said, 15 minutes. They sat cross-legged on the floor, fitting edges to edges. Ethan didn't correct Liam when he tried a wrong piece, just rotated it and let him discover the fit himself. When the puzzle was nearly done, Liam yawned. Amara checked her watch. Amara softly said, we should go. Ethan stood, walking them to the door. Ethan quietly said, thank you for coming. Amara softly said, thank you for keeping it simple. As they stepped into the hall, Liam turned back. Liam softly said, you should come fly the kite with us next time. Mom can decide the day. Amara said nothing, but she didn't close the offer. A house had been rearranged. Not just the furniture, but the air, the rules, the reasons to stay. And in the empty space on a man's fridge, there was proof that sometimes you prepare for family by leaving a place for it to arrive. Some moments are invitations, others are tests, and some, if you're lucky, are both: wind in the sky, a string in your hand, and someone beside you deciding whether you get to keep it. The text came on a Thursday morning, short and without ceremony. Amara, wind looks good Saturday. Meet us at the park, 10 a.m., bring long legs. Ethan smiled at the screen. She hadn't said the word kite, but she didn't need to. Saturday arrived with a sky so clear it felt like a dare. Ethan reached the park early, carrying nothing but his coat and the spare inhaler in his pocket. No camera, no gifts, no announcement. Liam spotted him first, already running slow laps with the kite tucked under his arm like a champion waiting for the race to start. Liam softly said, you came. Ethan quietly said, wouldn't miss it. Amara approached at a steady pace, eyes scanning the open grass, the trees, the sky, as if checking every possible thing that could go wrong before deciding it wouldn't. Amara softly said, it's steadier than last time, just enough wind. They moved together toward the wide stretch of field. Liam handed the kite to Ethan, bouncing on his toes. Liam softly said, your turn to run it up. Ethan glanced at Amara. Ethan quietly said, permission. She nodded just once. He took off at a careful pace, long strides but not reckless, feeling the string hum in his hand as the kite lifted, caught, and then climbed. Liam whooped, his voice carrying across the grass like an unbreakable thread. They traded off, Ethan holding the line steady, Liam guiding the tail through the breeze, Amara standing close enough to step in, far enough to let the boy have his sky. After a while, Liam flopped down on the grass, breathing hard but smiling. Liam softly said, your legs are good for flying, Mom's arms are good for saving it, my hands are good for steering. Ethan quietly said, that sounds like a team. Liam softly said, then we're a team. Amara looked at Liam, then at Ethan. For a moment, she didn't speak. Amara softly said, he's right. They sat in the grass together, the kite still bobbing overhead, each of them holding a section of the string, Liam's small hands in the middle, Amara's steady grip behind his, Ethan's at the end. For a long stretch, no one said anything. The wind spoke for them. When the kite finally drifted down, Liam ran to collect it, humming a song under his breath. Amara and Ethan stood a few feet apart, the quiet between them different now, not defensive, not sharp. Ethan quietly said, thank you for today, for letting me be part of it. Amara softly said, you've kept your promises, even the quiet ones. She looked out over the field, then back at him. Amara softly said, We can see where this goes, slowly, on his terms. Ethan nodded, the acceptance like sunlight breaking across his chest. Ethan quietly said, "That's all I want." Liam came running back, kite under his arm, cheeks flushed with wind and triumph. Liam softly said, "Next time I'm gonna make it touch the clouds." Ethan quietly said, "I'll be there to see it." Amara didn't correct him. And so the day the wind listened became the day a family began. Not with signatures, not with speeches, but with a kite that flew because 3 sets of hands held the string, each trusting the other not to let go. Some people wait a lifetime for the right conditions. Others learn that sometimes the wind is ready, you just have to be there when it is.